This set of videos will dig into the concepts behind the games. What can we learn from the games that we play? Why did World War I happen? Well, there are numerous underlying events that led up to the outbreak of World War I on July 28, 1914. Four major causes for World War I include nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and alliances. An acronym of these causes is MAIN, but watching these videos in the order displayed shows how these concepts build upon each other. Merriam-Webster defines imperialism as the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. In other words, a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. The concept of European empire building was nothing new. The Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, and colonization of the Americas all happened long before the 1900s. Africa and Asia, on the other hand, came under the gaze of the Europeans. In the early 1840s, Great Britain used the Opium War to open up China to trade with the Europeans. Japan was opened for trade by an agreement with American Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853. Africa as a continent had largely been left alone by the Europeans prior to the late 1800s, but the inventions of the Maxim gun, an early machine gun, and quinine to treat malaria lowered the European human cost to expand their empires into Africa. And the writings of David Livingstone chronicled the interior of the continent, which had been avoided by Europeans. Indeed, King Leopold of Belgium read Livingstone's writings and decided to colonize the Congo. The European powers, with the prompting of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, met at the Berlin Conference in 1884 to discuss European colonization of Africa. An agreement between these powers was signed in 1885. The European powers would need to inform one another of their intent to conquer and hold particular territory in Africa, but the Africans themselves were left out of the discussion. King Leopold of Belgium successfully conquered Congo in 1885, making it the first African colony, but it began a descent of European nations upon the African continent. By the early 1900s, all of Africa except Ethiopia and Liberia were colonized. The Italians had tried and failed to conquer Ethiopia at the Battle of Adwa, and Liberia was a fairly new independent nation that was created in 1821 by free people of color in the U.S. through the American Colonization Society and became independent in 1847, so the Europeans left that country alone. In the Western Hemisphere, American overseas imperialism had been present as early as the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, when the United States declared that European powers were not welcome to create new colonies in the Americas. The concept of manifest destiny, that the U.S. was destined to control the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans, was created in 1845. After agreeing to a treaty with Great Britain for the border between modern-day Canada and what is now the states of Washington and Oregon, the U.S. fought a war with Mexico from 1846 to 1848. By defeating Mexico in this war, the U.S. gained territory from Texas to California and what is today the 48 contiguous states. The U.S. bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, but the next big imperialism push in the United States was the Spanish-American War in 1898. While the Europeans were focused on conquering Africa, the U.S. fought for Cuba to become independent from Spain. In the process, the U.S. also used a modern fleet to defeat Spain's antiquated navy at the Philippines and annexing Hawaii in the process. And when the dust had settled, the Treaty of Paris that ended the Spanish-American War gave Cuba independence, and the U.S. gained Puerto Rico and Guam, purchased the Philippines, and gained a plot of land on Cuba at Guantanamo Bay. The U.S. was instrumental in the independence of Panama from Colombia in 1903, and the U.S. gained the use of the land that would become the Panama Canal, which was completed in 1914. The renewed effort toward imperialism in the late 1800s had nationalistic and militaristic goals, but the other motivations were industrialization and the humanitarian goals of the Europeans and Americans. Industrialization required resources, markets to sell finished goods, and the ability to transport those goods to the market. Imperialism offered a way for the Europeans and Americans to make that happen. Humanitarian efforts had different motivations. For some, the motivation was to spread their Christian faith to people who did not have it. For others, the motivation was to civilize the subjugated people. Education, particularly literacy, updated infrastructure, modern medicine, and new technology were brought to the conquered territories. While these advances clearly included many benefits for the colonized people groups, the use of social Darwinism as the justification for subjugation of people groups was a driving force behind many of the empire-building efforts. Social Darwinism was built on the evolutionary concepts of Charles Darwin, which stated that the strong survive and evolve and the weak fail. This was applied to culture in the late 1800s by stating that some countries, ethnicities, and groups were superior to others. Civilizing people groups meant that a value judgment was made that the group was uncivilized, and the colonizers believed that they had a superior culture. While these ideas have not held up to the test of time, they were embraced during the period of imperialism. By 1914, much of the world was under the control or influence of one or more of the major empires. The imperial aspirations of the European powers were butting up against one another, and the desire to expand would cause the conflict between these nations. If you enjoyed the video, find us at Lakeside Gamers 5 on YouTube.com. Like and subscribe for more content that teaches us the concepts behind the games. Thanks for watching.